And then for postdoctoral life.
But his last name and then got passed down to me because his siblings have a different spelling.
Exactly.
So my father's siblings spells L-O.
Okay.
It's only him.
I have seen that stuff. Now,
Okay.
Yeah.
Everybody here online, all right? Looks good. Okay.
that's good. Say if you can't hear us, otherwise we'll see you in the camera.
Very good. Well, welcome everybody to the second and last Oxford Digital Ethnography Group Seminar of this term. We won't have seminars over the next 2 weeks. So I think there's a bank holiday in 2 weeks' time. And then in the 8th week, we traditionally don't have a seminar because so few people are left standing by 8th week, Trinity term. But we do have a full schedule next Michaelmas term. So keep your eye on if you're interested, keep your eye on the Oxford Internet Institute webpage for the Oxford Digital Ethnography Group, OxDEG, and interesting and diverse program next term. Good, I'm really happy to introduce See Pok Loa, who is a DPhil candidate in the sociology department here, Swire Scholar at St. Anthony's College. His interests are sociology of work, time, temporality, technology, and inequality. He's also interested in applying both qualitative and quantitative methods, including ethnography and in cross-cultural analysis. I think his research for his doctoral project is based on a China-Japan difference. Is that right? He's published some articles in the Sociological Review, American Behavioral Scientists, and Asian Population Studies. And today he's going to talk about the precarity of doing digital ethnography based on research of self-employed professionals in the high-skill platform economy. So without further ado, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Bill, for the very kind introduction. My name is See Pok, and I'm a final year DPhil in sociology, finishing up my dissertation, writing about all the exciting times. So I, in general, study the cultural dimension of work in a digital age. So meaning that I'm more interested in the values, norms, and ideals and cultural logic underlying work and associated with work in a digital age. So today, I will be talking about the precarity of doing digital ethnography. So the agenda is threefold. First, I will give you a rather intimate and honest reveal of my research journey, because I think very often qualitative research process is known as a black box or a very messy terrain. But when we see published articles or book monographs, we don't really see that extremely roller coaster journey or the very messy terrain behind the scenes. So I'm going to reveal this black box and tell you how messy it could be. And the second part is I will go through this idea of ethnographic work as precarious work. I'm actually not the first person to say ethnography is precarious. So cultural and economic sociologist Ashley Mears, who studied viral content on the internet, also previously studied fashion models, has coined this idea already. But I will be extending this idea in a digital setting and talk about how ethnography, digital ethnography, can be very precarious. So when I was rehearsing this presentation in the weekends, I found out that I overran disastrously. So I unfortunately had to chop away some content, and I'm so sorry I won't have time to get over the empirical findings of the dissertation chapters and papers. So if you come because you're interested in the cross-national variation of experience of precarity, so sorry, we won't have time to go through that, but I'm happy to talk about that in the Q&A. So this will only just be a highly methodological reflection. So just to go over the research very quickly, it's a cross-national comparison about the ideals of work and experience of precarity in China and in Japan. So in other words, I'm interested in how people think about how we should work. So the data comes from a variety of sources. The major component is through online interviews with self-employed professionals on the digital freelance labour market. And by professionals, I mean highly educated people working on cognitively complex tasks. So in my sample, it would include people working in finance, in consulting, in engineering, web development, data work, and also creative work and research. I also conducted almost 2 years of digital ethnography. So I took screenshots of chat rooms in support forums on these online freelance platforms, and also read loads of lifestyle and also work blog articles produced by these freelance workers. And at the end of, towards the end of the data collection, I also arranged an offline 3-month visit to Tokyo. So mostly it's a complementary nature. So I met some of the people I already talked to online, rather than generating and then meeting new people and generating new data. So this is me in Tokyo. This is Toda University of Tokyo. And this is me at the Institute of Social Science Research, which I was affiliated with as a visiting fellow. So as I said, the research is a really roller coaster journey, and both the theoretical and empirical focus shifted rather drastically. I almost cannot recognize my transfer of status proposal anymore because nothing is translatable into my current research. So I entered the deep field in 2020, 4 years ago, during the peak of COVID. And I had a broad question in mind. At that time, I was really curious about how people with so little stability and institutional support can experience everyday life and make long-term life plannings. So when I began the research, I wanted to focus on non-standard workers in the service sectors, meaning contract workers, part-time workers, people who are coming from a less privileged background than my current sample, the online freelance workers. So I got my curate approved in Trinity term after a very painful process, I think all of you know. And I was very excited to start collecting data and rolling out interviews, recruiting people. But at that time, because of COVID, I cannot travel to both China and Japan, so I could only use digital tools to reach out to a potential interviewees. So at that time, the digital part was only just really a practical tool to resolve the COVID problem. And then I waited for almost 2 to 3 months. It was Michaelmas term in my second year. I could not find anyone apart from one interviewee from Japan. So I was panicking because I realized maybe it was not feasible. And it was quite clear that the internet wasn't really a natural habitat for these kind of non-standard workers from the service sectors to be active in. But very interestingly enough, so I met someone from the Japanese studies program, a friend at Oxford, and then she linked me up with a freelance worker working in finance in Tokyo. And then we had a chat. And then after that, I became very curious on what made this person's experience of uncertainty and precarity so hugely different than the part-time workers that I have talked to. So obviously, online freelance workers are of a very, very different segment of the so-called non-standard workforce compared to those working in the service sectors. They are often much more highly educated, and they are often coming from a more well-resourced background. So I decided to switch my focus to look at these online freelance workers. So after this very roller coaster process now in my thesis, the research question has now really transformed into about how the cultural notion of an ideal worker has changed as work becomes more precarious and digitalized. So just some information about the field site. This is a 3-city comparison. In China, the field sites are Shanghai and also Shenzhen. And then in Japan, it is Tokyo. It looks kind of similar with the tower in these pictures. So just about a bit of information about the geography. Shanghai and Shenzhen, they're both coastal cities in China. So in China, coastal cities are usually much more economically highly developed, and the state invests much more resources in these cities. And then obviously Tokyo is the capital of Japan. So there are theoretical reasons to focus on these cities and countries because China and Japan, they both represent a very rapid and dramatic labour market transition and precarization of labour compared to economies in Western countries. So both countries, they have previously a very well protected dominant labour regime. So in China, it is the iron rice bowl, and then in Japan, it is the 实行 and the lifetime employment model in big corporates. But both have been kind of breaking down and been dissolved since the 80s and 90s. So it's interesting because both the iron rice bowl and the lifetime employment model in Japan, they were not always accessible by all people in the population, even when they were the dominant cultural model. So in China, it's mostly people affiliated with the state who had more access to these iron rice bowl. And in Japan, it's mostly professionals and highly educated people who had a better chance of getting this lifetime employment contract in big corporates. But what is more important, I think, it's the cultural norms and the cultural expectations about stability that these regimes has transited and how it has become a mismatch with today's very highly precarious economy. And both China and Japan has been investing a lot on digital platforms because they see this as an opportunity to narrate and restructure their economy as a tech and innovation-focused kind of economy. And both the cities, all the cities I focus here are major economic hubs in their respective countries, and also with very well-developed infrastructure development in technology and innovation. So just a bit about the sample. So I've got 30 participants from China and also 28 from Japan. Age 25 to 42 and 5 to 57. The Japanese range was a bit skewed because I've got 2 to 3 people about 50-year-olds. Roughly gender balance. Education, all are quite highly educated. And most importantly, this is overseas experience. So 1/3 and also almost half of the participants from the sample, they had either experience of doing their undergrad and postgrad overseas in Western countries, which is quite unusual in Asia, and also had experience of working in Western countries. And these kind of reflected their rather privileged and well-resourced family and class origin as well. Right, access. So I use a mix of direct and indirect access points because freelance workers can sometimes be a bit of a hard to reach population. So the direct access point is of course obviously the freelance job platforms. And then the secondary access points are support forums linked to these online freelance platforms, LinkedIn, WeChat, and also some Facebook groups. But for these secondary access point, I will have to conduct an extra process of filtering because I have to make sure these people are relying on platforms as their major income. So I rely on 2 major platforms to collect data and recruit people. The first one is Upwork. I'm showing this here because of data transparency. This is not a talk sponsored by Upwork. And the second platform was Lanshito in Tokyo. which is very similar to Upwork, focusing on professionals, highly skilled work. I had more trouble recruiting interviewees from the Japanese side, so I had to like expand the scope of recruitment. This is why I included an extra platform. So this is what it looks like on Upwork when you post a job posting. So I first registered myself as an employer on Upwork, and then I create a job post to recruit interviewees. And I made it quite clear this is not actually a job, and it will not come with any financial rewards. So you have to put this because you don't want to annoy people, because freelance workers are really busy people. So after you posted the job proposal, then you have a selection stage of you can send out lots of message to freelance workers to invite them to bid for this job task, in this case, an interview request. And this is a Japanese version of a post that I published on Upwork. So it's quite simple. Just briefly introduce myself, who I am. I'm recruiting people from Tokyo also. This will spend 16 minutes approximately. And the benefits of participating in this research. And also last line, you can see a very long line just to politely say this is actually not a job. Again, not to annoy and irritate people. And when I was posting these job requests on Upwork and talking to people, I came across with a Chinese engineer on Upwork called Sun. So Sun was quite an experienced freelance worker on Upwork, and he told me it's actually not a good practice to post like an interview request as a job. And then through Sun, I learned about the existence of actually a support forum on Upwork. It's not actually the system where they find and match jobs itself, but rather like a secondary site where freelance workers can bond with each other and provide informal coaching with each other. So you can see they've got like events, informal events lines of teaching each other how to review proposal, profiles, strategies, selection. So these are informal communities. And there are also self-introductory threads where people would just write maybe a line or two introducing themselves and making friends. So I use them as a vine as well to connect with people and also to get my name out and to promote the research. I also maintained ties with my interviewees, and also we chat on a daily life basis. And sometimes they would like send me photos and pictures of what they were doing and things that they were attending. So this is from a digital creative working in Shanghai, freelance worker, and he was sending me, telling me he's working with his cats. And then the photo on the right was an informal gathering of freelance workers in Shanghai. And then he was, I did not know why he focused on the bottles instead of the people, but they told me they were drinking Russian plum wine, which I'm quite curious about what it tastes like. Yeah. So going back to the major thesis of the presentation, I was claiming ethnography can be precarious. And of course, precarity is a major concept in the literature of work and employment. So in the literature, there are several obstacles or difficulties that researchers have long identified, confronted by freelance workers, including competing for visibility and presence in a rather low-trust environment, cultivating strong ties with clients, also confronting the hidden rules on digital platforms, schedule instability and work task conflicts, and also challenges coming from COVID-19. So I will very soon tell you how these conditions kind of mirror the challenge that ethnographers are facing in the digital setting. But first I want to go over the general idea of ethnography as a precarious work. So as I said, I'm not really the first person to make this claim. This is coined by Ashley Mears on an article published on Sociological Quarterly. So ethnography here is defined as the co-presence of the researcher and the research subject, the researcher engaging in the same rhythm, rate of movement, same emotional and physical sensation of the people we are curious about. So in her succinct account of her research journey in the freelance modeling industry, so Mears talked about how transforming from a formal model to a sociologist, how they can influence the power dynamics in the field. And she showed how even as an insider ethnographer, research can be quite risky. Right, so in her case, her experience was that she used to be a freelance model, and then she turned into a sociologist and decided to do a research about the insider world of the freelance modeling industry. And she argued the uncertainties faced by highly precarious forms of labor, in her case, the fashion models and the freelance fashion workers, parallel the risky positions of ethnographers. So when she said ethnography is precarious, she actually meant two things. There are two dimensions here. The first one is about the invisible cost and change the ethnographer themselves is experiencing. So this resonated a bit with Carnell sociology, as Louis Wacquant claimed. Ethnography is very much about aligning the researcher's own habitus to the disposition of the research subject in the research field. And this requires lots of deeply emotional knowledge and embodied experience in the social world. And the ethnographers themselves very often have to experience some kind of internal turmoil. There could also be scarring effects to the ethnographers because they have been immersed in the field for a prolonged period, and these kind of change their habits and dispositions as well. And for labor sociologists, there is also an extra layer of becoming subjugated labor because during the ethnographic field work, they have to experience the same exploitative conditions and challenge in the workplace. And the second precarious dimension of ethnography is more about whether you can successfully generate data. So it's more about whether you can get people to talk to you and whether they are willing to talk to you. So this is really about the uncertainty of data generation rather than the ethnographer themselves. Sorry. So this is about more about relationship management with participants and identity management, also navigating some invisible, implicit social rules of the social world that you're studying. And also more about positionality, power, and inequality, and how do you make people to find you not threatening and make them comfortable to talk to you. So this idea is more relevant to what I will talk about later on. So if we take a step back and revisit the idea of precarity, we can see the definition of precarious work might be actually quite familiar to what most ethnographers are experiencing. So precarious work is employment that's uncertain, unpredictable, and risky from the view of the worker. And I want to tell that ethnographers themselves are pretty much experiencing very similar process because the research is very uncontrollable and you have little control over how the interactions in the field site will unfold. This also echoes with the general logic of knowledge production in qualitative research, which emphasize a logic of discovery rather than a logic of hypothesis testing and verification. So a lot of different ethnographers have kind of detailed this sense of not being able to control things in the fields as detailed by some wonderful ethnographers. I'm putting some of my favorite books here in their research. For example, in research studying global wealth elites, the researcher was taken to airplanes and jets where she didn't know where they would be heading to. And also in a study about Chinese investment in Africa, the researcher was taken to minefields where she was physically totally unprepared for. And also for researchers studying cybercrime, because of data availability, researchers often have to change midway their strategies of data generation access during the research process. So how do all these ideas of ethnography as a precarious work apply in a digital setting? So just a bit of background about digital ethnography. We've got some fine experts in this room, so I'm not going to go too detailed. So two types of inquiry here. The first one is using ethnography to study the technology themselves, and also the second type, studying how the digital experience shape behavior and intersect with the broader social norm and reality. So in this research, in my project, I'm focusing more about the second category. Context. So digital ethnography approach can include participant observation in virtual and online communities, and it becomes more necessary as the digital mediated and network live and offline domains become more merged together. And sociologists were rather late or slow, I would say, in picking up this technique of digital ethnography, but they have started to recognize that there is a need to create research technique both through digital technology and for digital technology. But the technique of digital ethnography also requires some very unique requirement of knowledge production and also generating some extra additional concerns for researchers. So digital ethnography got more mainstream because of COVID, obviously. So the dominant narrative, at least in the field of sociology, there are a few dominant narratives about the method. The first one is a very optimistic one because of the increasing pressure on publishing graduate students, and researchers need to find a faster and more efficient type of data collection compared to offline data collection. And the second narrative comes from the field of criminology and also sociology of deviance, and also scholars studying online politics. So they've taken that digital ethnography provides a chance to selectively, for the researchers to selectively reveal their physical traits, such as gender, race, and age, to facilitate data collection. Right, and as I've mentioned before, digital ethnography requires the researcher to conduct reflexive decision about the researcher's participation and self-presentation that other forms of qualitative research do not require. So in other words, there are some unique or peculiar things about the online environment that makes ethnographers have to readjust and roll out something quite specific. Okay, so this is the core part of my presentation, and now I will use my own research and example to demonstrate how digital ethnography is precarious. So I will go over 4 issues and experience that digital ethnographers will have to go through. The first one is on presenting yourself, your presence, your visibility, and also building trust with interviewees. So last year when I was getting coffee with a professor from LSE, so she wrote something about qualitative research, so she was very interested in what I was doing. So she asked me, so you're doing research about freelance workers, so why is it, what's the difficult thing about studying freelance workers? Aren't all the people already on the platforms? You just have to click on them and send them the invitation, right? So my answer is yes and no. Right, so going back to the popular narrative on how sociologists think about digital ethnography, in most sociologist field, especially in criminology. Digital ethnography is more about lurking yourself or conducting deep cover disguised research. But the problem that I had here for studying online freelance workers is a different one. So rather than disguising yourself, my problem is to get yourself out, to be more visible rather than hiding yourself. So generating data on freelance job platforms was not easy, as one Japanese freelance workers taught me. So on a job platform, you're actually just a profile. So the person's not a person. The person's just a profile. There's only a description and some lines of information here, and there's no explanation. So it's very difficult to build trust on platforms and make things rather intimate. So this caused a problem of misrecognition of the researcher. So the question now becomes, how do I make myself not just a profile and make people feel comfortable to approach me and to accept my interview request? So to kind of reach out to more people, in 2021, I started a Twitter and also an Instagram account in Japanese to kind of bring my name out and to also reach out to more participants. So this is the Twitter homepage that I had created. So you can see it's about the Oxford brand is quite clear there. And I also kind of put my Keurig number there just to make things more clear. And I also created recruitment posters. Sorry, it's untranslated, I apologize. So I started created lots of recruitment posters so people can just take them and then send them on WhatsApp and circulate them quite widely. And I also regularly posted other slides I created about the research, so people can quickly grasp what I'm concerned about and why they should care about the topic. So just for your background information, I did all the posters myself because I was a creative in startup companies before returning to graduate school. So in this process, I felt like I have returned to my full-time job in startup, mobilizing all my creative skills to promote my research project. This is same thing, but on Instagram. But then there's a problem because I kept posting these posters. So I did get like people reaching out and applying to do the interview with me, but still it's not quick enough given the short period of PhD program and also the limited time for data collection in a deep field. So I changed my strategy a bit midway, and I decided I would just post normal content as a person online. So this is New Year in 2022, and I made a post and saying Happy New Year to everyone, and just post pictures that I've seen, pictures of Oxford that I've taken. And it actually, it is quite a good strategy, and I think people tend to see you more as a person when they see like more daily life content coming from the researcher themselves, and also people were quite curious on what a student at Oxford is like and what they are actually experiencing daily life. Right. So the second, another strategy I used to facilitate trust building was the community and support forum that I used associated with Upwork. So on the top one, you can see it's actually a self-introductory thread. So the admins say, oh, I joined in 2017. I picked up this client about software development, and then we got top rated. So it's a thread where you can see there are like 103 people already made a comment introducing themselves. So it became a very nice entry point, and I also made a comment there and introduced myself. Right, so this is the inside of the self-introductory thread, and people were introducing themselves, saying, oh, I'm here at work for 6 years, and then I earn quite decent money And then you can see for some parts, they also kind of revealed their motivation of entering gig work as well. But accessing the people was only the first step. Making them feel comfortable accepting your interview was the more challenging thing. Though I was quite explicit that I am a student from Oxford, some people said that they thought that I was a scam. Because they don't believe, because Oxford sound quite distant from the participants, so they don't believe that an Oxford researcher is present here and going to talk to them. Of course, they only revealed that after we had the interview. Yeah. So this is a WeChat conversation with a potential interviewee, and then he was asking me the left-hand side. He was asking me a lot of questions. Sorry, it's again untranslated, so I'll do voice acting to tell you what the content is about. So the first line goes, can you tell me what's your name and what's your school, and how are you going to collect your data and ensure you are abiding with your research ethics and our rights will be protected, and how you were going to use our data. So I think this is someone that's very well aware of the participants' rights, which is great actually. So I kind of replied again, clarifying the whole research process and what I will do to ensure their privacy and also rights. And then on the right-hand side, it's the same person. The participant was kind of complaining to me that he has been getting so many these kind of interview requests from different researchers. So again, she said, oh, I was feeling very annoyed. There have been so many of these kind of like interview requests. I recently got one from a researcher from a university in China. It is quite shocking. So I made a short reply here. I actually didn't say anything. I was trying because I wanted to know how they would react and how they were thinking about digital researchers. So I just replied quite briefly. Oh, maybe it's a popular topic, that's why you've been getting so many requests. And then he kept complaining again. So he said, oh, I already declined 2 interview requests, and there's also someone from another uni in China. They don't even have a topic. I think they're treating me like a free chat GPT. Yeah, I was so annoyed. Yeah. But again, you can see how data is not easy to get, and it's also a highly uncontrollable process that you have to spend effort in building trust. So the relationship didn't really end when the interview ended. You continue the relationship, and I maintained ties with many of my participants. So this is just a daily life conversation on WeChat again. And we were actually exchanging tips on how to keep ourselves productive. And I was sending her software of timetable management tools because I know that from the interview she was quite interested in these kind of digital tools things. So we're kind of like exchanging tips about using digital tools. Right. Going back to this. So what I want to say is that gig workers often engage in a one-off job transaction and they don't really have a clear job opportunity in the future. And the literature on employment precarity has documented low trust as an issue in fostering job transactions. So doing digital ethnography is somehow similar because in a highly atomized environment, people don't know you and they don't know each other. So there's no way you could use entry points in conventional ethnography to kind of just break through the barriers and also to roll out snowball sampling because people just are disconnected rather from each other. Okay, the second major challenge that makes the research process very uncontrollable is about the hidden rules on the platform themselves. So like many conventional work organizations and sociologists show, ethnography also requires the researcher to navigate the rules of the institution. So in this case, it is the hidden rules coming from the digital platforms that I have to navigate. Right. So this is an email I got from Upwork, quite shortly after I wrote out my data collection. My job post was taken down quite quickly after they went public. So I actually made several kind of mistakes here. The first one is platforms actually forbid users from exchanging contact information online because they would think it as kind of circumvention. So they only restrict people from using their chatbots tools to communicate. So this is quite difficult to generate data. So when I did my job posting, I was quite aware of this. So I didn't put my email address and any of my Oxford webpage on the job posting. But I tried to probe where the line was. So I put my the WeChat handle on the job posting. But then unfortunately, under the surveillance of platforms, that the job post was almost immediately taken down. And I received an email from the platform's trust and safety team, thinking that this post is not safe. And by doing so, platforms discourage network formation among workers and reducing the chance of organising collective forms of labour resistance. But this also kind of created obstacles for ethnographers. And then after that, I received a second email from the platform. So this time I made a posting for my Japanese participants. And this time the job posting was just purely in Japanese, but then it was taken down again by the trust and safety team because the reason was that I did not write in English. Because I thought writing in the participant's native language would be more eye-catching, and I think it was. But the team explained neither Chinese nor Japanese was the prevailing language of the digital platform, so they had to take down my post. The team also made it quite clear it wasn't my first violation from the platforms. So as a result, my account was kind of frozen. So if I had made one more mistake, as they said, they would kind of permanently block me from the platform. So this is kind of similar to conventional ethnographers studying the shop floor in factories. Like when you get evicted by the factories, then basically you lose your pool of data. So of course, I mean, technically in this case, I could have just start a new account on Upwork and redo the data collection, but then you would lose all your conversations with your previous interviewees. So I had to write an email to the service team to explain, I already fixed this problem, could you please unfreeze my account? So unfortunately they did. So other researchers, colleagues also from the OII, actually, they invented some ways of kind of circumventing this platform surveillance. So their way of doing it is first they create a profile list on Upwork and they kind of generate a list of profiles, and then they find these people on LinkedIn or different source and then inbox them, direct message them on LinkedIn where this is allowed. Of course, this is one way of doing it, but for a graduate student, this is quite time consuming when you're just doing your research on your own. Right. I'll be quick, I think I've been talking. Right. So the third problem that makes the process more uncertain is the time challenge related to the freelance workers. So the time patterns of the freelance workers reflected the broader temporal logic in the digital world because the freelance workers are either having a very highly packed or an unpredictable work schedule. So sometimes they would reply you instantly, but sometimes they would wait like after a few days or maybe a week to reply to you. And there are also participants who pulled out at the very last minute of the research. When you fix a time for interview, they would just inbox you, oh, I suddenly got this request from the clients that I need to work on, so I can't make it anymore. So there is this problem of temporal instability. There's a problem about time zone difference because I have been in the UK So that means that we are around 8 hours behind. So normally when I do the interviews, they were already, it was already evening for them, and they could be quite tired. Sometimes to break the interview into 2 days, just to maintain their energy. And then the rather fourth unexpected element, and also the most unpredictable element, was COVID. But it kind of facilitates data generation when I think back. So especially in the Chinese context, there was this zero COVID policy rolled out, especially in Shanghai. So they basically barricaded every small district they have categorized. And you can see people were not quite happy, and they were trying to break out from the barricaded areas. So lots of my interviewees were kind of trapped in their own home, and that's kind of like cut off most social activities from their side. But it was actually quite a nice entry point for me, because people were desperate to talk to people. So when I reached out, they were actually quite happy that someone is willing to talk and listen to them ranting about all the COVID policy. So this often started as a start of our pre-interview conversation. Oops. Right, yes. So what I'm trying to say is the 4 elements adding together, navigating a low trust environment, building, navigating network ties, building ties with the participants, and also navigating the network, the platform surveillance and rules, and also the temporal challenges by the participants, and also COVID. Adding up together, they make the research process very uncontrollable. And these are some very unique challenges that are confronted by digital workers, which in turn made digital ethnography also very highly unpredictable. And ethnographers will often have to think about new ways to kind of navigate these uncertainty and to resolve them. So this is the generic idea of precarity of digital. So yeah, I very much look forward to your questions and thoughts. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for really thought-provoking journey through your doctoral research experience, and especially the many precarious elements of doing, not only of doing ethnography per se, but in this particular digital context, in this particular time in which your research began, which kind of provides levels of precarity. I have lots of thoughts and questions, but maybe I'll begin by opening up the floor if anybody has any.
Yes.
I have one question, which was, you were talking about the precarity of like the process of doing digital ethnography and kind of the analogous nature of that with the work they were doing. From more of a kind of like, I don't know, political economy of precarious work, did you reflect on any, you were talking before Bill gave me about like you're applying for like postdocs and like a lot of people alongside academic work are having to supplement it alongside, you know, teaching commitments, external consultants. Like, were there any kind of, as academia becomes more precarious and piecemeal and moves towards an upward almost style model of like how teaching and research is done, were there any other kind of parallels that struck you?
Right, that's a really great question. I think it concerns the underlying broader pattern of precarity that higher education workers are facing. So I think there are different layers here for academics. I think it is, especially after Brexit in the UK context, universities are making jobs even more precarious. I think what academia is experiencing is kind of a broader process of what research is called a white collar insecurity. So this is a term where researchers were used to studying unemployment among middle class and also professional workers, and I think it applies quite well to higher education workers as well. Yeah, I think there's something about positionality I haven't actually touched on because I don't really have time. When I was talking to the interviewees informally after the interviews, and we were kind of exchanging what was going on our daily life, people were actually quite struck knowing that academia was actually quite precarious and uncertain. And this is why I think the project was actually quite illuminating, just not just from a theoretical perspective, but very often I find the strategies the freelance workers are using to secure their employability are actually quite translatable to doctoral students and people working in academia as well, like self-branding, doing networking stuff like this. So this is really an interesting thing, yeah. Yes.
I just wanted to say thank you. It's terrific and really interesting. And just comment that I'm at OII and this precarity has also crept into the research we do in terms of Facebook has gotten rid of CrowdTangle or API access. Twitter has done the same. So many other companies have. So as the world moves online, not just for ethnography, I'd say, I think you can extend this precarity to what we're doing down the street, or even for people in the maybe more nonprofit or monitoring world, that the same problem has entered, that platforms have actually actively worked to move researchers off or move nonprofits or monitoring organizations offline. So I think you can really extend this to a much broader space. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your thought. Yeah, I think it's so precarity was actually a quite a long-standing trend happening already for quite some time. So this phenomenon of precarious online freelancer phenomenon is at the intersection of two things. One is the already happening precarization of labour since the 80s, and also the digitalization of work. So it's a combination of two macro level process adding together. And as I said, you're definitely right. So workers from a wide range, from also professionals and also at the different spectrum, like food delivery and also service sectors, they had the same problem. I think the theoretically unique thing about these highly educated people is that they are not used to these things. So they often carry this cultural expectation and the norms that they could have potentially getting a more competitive role or stable role in the formal labour market. But these people kind of chose to kind of not take up job security, but to enter these work. And then the second thing is really about the resources they have in comparison to the other precarious workers from service sectors, because these workers, they have much more higher volume and variety of capital that make them better at navigating the rules, and also have better volume of cultural knowledge. Also, they've been getting more family support from their parents as well. This is something that I had in my dissertation. So this is quite theoretically distinct, because you can look at the advantage of these people and how they kind of actually use the advantage to navigate this.
Yes. It's a very quick one. Like I know when we're talking about in-person field work, we often kind of talk about how different things like gender, for example, like the danger service you face. I was wondering if that's also kind of came up in your research and mine, how that maybe impacts ones like the Kirby's research.
Yeah, I can relate to that very much, because before the BPhil, my previous project, now already published in Sociological Review, is actually offline. So this is actually my first digital project. So I can relate to what you were saying, because in my previous project, people quickly know who you are when they see you. And in a digital setting, I think gender wasn't very prominent, say, in the process. Age, maybe not so much say as well, but origin and ethnicity was quite a factor that's affecting the process, because I was I'm not native to the cities that I'm studying. I'm not from Shanghai, I'm not from Shenzhen, I'm not from Tokyo either. So it's funny because when you send out the recruitment message online, they don't know who you are. They can't identify you, but when you talk to them, when you have the interviews, they will see you virtually and listen to your voice. So it's funny for the Chinese group. I think they had some difficulty trying to figure out like what are you like, because they could roughly tell I have a Southern accent when I speak Mandarin. They were, oh, you're probably from the South, or maybe you're from Taiwan. Like they can't tell. But I would be very honest in the research process. I would just frankly tell I am from Hong Kong. And it's interesting because they would kind of think, okay, you are not 100% an insider. So they would sometimes explain some of the terms and cultural terminology to me. So when we were talking about, for example, lying flat, typing in China, they would assume I don't know much about it. So lying flat is a phenomenon where people are resisting to work and they are not willing to work as hard as before. So this is kind of an advantage, I would say. And then for the Japanese side, it was even more interesting because they can clearly tell I'm an outsider just from my name, also from my Japanese accent. So when we had the interview, it was, so for some people, it actually made them more comfortable because they think, oh, so you're not Japanese, so I don't have to abide from the cultural norms and the rules of a usual Japanese person. I don't have to undergo that cultural expectation of how I should behave. So it kind of become a rather liberating zone for them to kind of just speak about what they were thinking. But of course, there are challenges when you're an outsider, and for some interviewers, they're not very forthcoming. But I would say that you can design quite a long interview guide to overcome this challenge. So as people get warmed up, they kind of become more forthcoming to you.
Interesting, thank you.
So I had a couple of questions. One is related to building trust.
Yes.
And the other one is, I guess, related to gender, but maybe more broadly than gender. I'm kind of wondering about the relationship between people who gravitate towards this work
Yes.
or do this work and the wider employment situation you mentioned it briefly, the
Yes.
collapse of, or the diminishment of lifetime employment in Japan, the expectation that people could be permanently employed in, in sort of stable
Yes.
employment, cradle to grave, which was an ideal. And as you mentioned, not everybody had access to this ever, but since the late 1980s, I think the assumption is it's become even more diminished, even more difficult to achieve. And lots of people are writing about, I don't know if you know Emma Cook at Hokkaido University, been writing about young men in precarious employment.
Yeah.
So I was struck by your slide that showed roughly half and half in terms of gender balance. So in my mind, I have Japanese sort of employment landscape a little bit. So I'm kind of wondering, how does precarious employment you were looking at map onto a kind of wider employment situation in China and Japan? It's a big question, but I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit more about that. And with regard to gender, are women more likely to gravitate towards this because of maybe flexibility or child rearing, or still even now relative exclusion from more stable jobs in the Japanese economy? I'm just wondering how those things happen.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a great one. So Things were quite different in the Chinese side and the Japanese side. For the Japanese side, the gender balance was kind of just a result of it was data driven. In the Chinese side, I deliberately make them roughly gender balance, so I could do some comparison. I started the research in Shanghai originally, and I don't know why, but I got lots of women participating in the research, but not much men. So I had to expand the research to also Shenzhen. There I got lots of men. But this might be because of the city's demographic population, and also Shanghai was, I think, more associated with the kind of like creative work, freelancing, and in Shenzhen it's more about tech workers, engineers. So there is some kind of gender segregation in these occupations, so that explains the gender imbalance. Whereas in the Japanese side, it's interesting because I just naturally get roughly half men, women. And I was surprised myself as well, because if we look at the literature on non-standard work, the non-standard work market was kind of rated as a more feminized labor market, as a solution for women who has suffered from marriage penalty and also childbearing penalty. They kind of suffered from a less chance of getting back into the formal labor market, therefore they get pushed into non-standard work. So my data isn't at the best position to verify this problem, because the sample is largely not married and single and without child. It was quite surprising because I've got a wide range. So the age range, as I said, is from 25 to 40s. So I've got actually a section in the interview guide asking people's larger life plans and intention to get married. And surprisingly, people were just telling me, I haven't thought about marriage. Even for people who are already in their 30s. So that's kind of quite surprising. But I guess it could be a result of an intersection with the trend of individualization, and also the breakdown of marital norms in East Asia. It was quite surprising. In terms of the narrative they use when I asked them what's meaningful work to you, what makes it meaningful, it's very much about, in China, it's very much about pleasure. So they take it as a fun job. Whereas in Japan, it's very much, they also think it as fun, but it's more like a pragmatic exit to regular job market where they had lots of dissatisfaction. But I've got a freelance illustrator woman in her 40s in Japan. And then she was telling me so she used to be an architect, I think, which is very impressive in that generation in Japan. So she was telling me when she was going into the office, full-time office, she was asked to arrive an hour or two earlier than other people every day, just to prepare tea, and also to do the cleaning of the office. So she told me a lot of stories about inequality, and also the kind of collectivist mindset that she didn't really enjoy, so therefore she quit the job, and she wanted to have ownership about her work. So she entered gig work. So it was kind of a different narrative than the Chinese participants used. But yeah, that's a great question there.
Right.
I do a comment, but I just thought it's super interesting, and it's very like human and relatable, that respondent who is being like, oh, like, stop bothering me, like everyone bothers me, but like has gone on to engage in like the fact that the event is in like I saw there's something great on that. And I was just curious, like there's other types of researchers who looks like the problem of over-researched communities. And I guess I'm interested, like from an outsider, it seems like there's millions of people do gig work, and yet how I don't know. Did you approach when people say we've been approached a lot before? Like, were you approaching that with like a hermeneutic of trust? You were like, oh yeah, you definitely have, or like how is it just chance that loads of people are connecting with the same people? Like how in this like ecosystem of people doing this precarious labor force of the workers, and then you also have the precarious workforce of like the researchers, how I don't know, I'm interested to know more about this relationship between like other researchers, and you're kind of one among many of this kind of like faceless. I saw it's really interesting. Any more thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think also it's more about I guess you are curious about how to make yourself more distinct and convincing to.
Well, I guess more as in like how represents that conversation you had with that one
Yes.
person? Did that come up a lot, or was that kind of a one-off? Hearing that there be multiple requests of.
I would say it's not uncommon, so I did get quite a lot. But I think so what stands out is I think people think that I'm more well prepared. It's not just about I showed you the conversation on explaining the whole data collection process and what I would do to protect their right. That's one thing. But when they saw, so I attached like a short link of the PowerPoint slides that I've created for participants, so they could just click and view all the research details. So I think that helped really a lot because people have this impression, oh, you have already established something, and it's a very well designed project already, and they get convinced. The other thing is I want to talk about the Oxford brand actually, that I haven't had time to talk about. I think the Oxford brand has an indirect effect on getting participants. It's not a direct effect. So it's not like, oh, people think, oh, this is an Oxford research, it's very credible, I'm going to join this. It doesn't work like that. I think it's more like, oh, this is someone from Oxford. What is it like doing research in Oxford? I'm really curious about this person. I want to see, especially for the Japanese side, I would say, because they would think Oxford represent the global. So they wanted to connect with someone who has gone global. I've got this participant telling me quite bluntly after the interview. She told me she accepted the research only because she's curious about what is it like studying at Oxford. So it was quite hilarious. So when I say indirect effect, it's people being curious about Oxford rather than a direct credibility thing. Yeah, but you're right. I'm not sure about how other people generate their data. I think lots of people provide financial rewards as well. But in my case, I didn't pay them. So
Was that a conscious decision? Was that because of a lack of resources?
more about the lack of resources, but also it would generate extra administrative process that I'll have to go through and work out as well. So that's
Would you have paid them? Would you have paid them? Like
if I
without,
had the money.
if you have the money and you don't have to go through the admin?
That's so good, yeah.
Yeah.
Time is money for them.
Yeah, I also think there's something interesting there about like what these internet technologies are doing is like lowering the barriers to entry. And I guess like when you're working with a real field site, you can only go to one field site, so you're invested in like doing some research before. And the idea that like in the same way that people can send off kind of spam job requests to 100 people, you can also have like researchers just sending out kind of like spam block emails to like hundreds of people. So I guess there's interesting like parallels there between like.
Yeah, that too, yeah.
Other questions, comments? Yeah, that's an interesting point about the Oxford brand. I bumped into that a few times in Japan myself, including one interviewee in the games industry who said, I accepted this interview because I've never met an Oxford person.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I wanted to ask one last question, which was on trust building. I guess it's similar to my other question, a little bit about contextualization. I guess in digital methods, it's a persistent theme.
Yeah.
How do you build trust online? You know, most of us, our template is offline, face to face, and I was particularly in Japan. This was the area of research I was involved in earlier incarnation, but things like the importance of the after hours, people going out together. Got words for that, tsukiyai, and these kinds of relationship building activities, and how important those are in building the kinds of relationships that then allow you to get things done comfortably, smoothly. So it just seems with that cultural, at least on the Japan side, with that cultural backdrop, there could be even potentially even a higher, sort of even more difficulty in making this transition to sort of online trust building. And I just wondered if you had any insights from your own experience on how that worked. Did it seem like there was a cultural dimension to it? Comparing, for example, your Japan and China stuff with experience in the UK. It seems like there might be more easier, like you said, people to cancel at the last moment. If you have an offline relationship and you're in proximity, perhaps that would be a little bit, more difficult to do in terms of human relations.
Yeah.
I just wondered if you had any further thoughts.
Yes, great question. So before answering this question, I just want to share a bit about the Oxford brand thing that we were talking about. But when I was physically in Japan, actually, I was staying in a cultural exchange house. So I was living with 8 other people. And then half of the housemates are local Japanese young people, and then the other half are from international background. I deliberately chose this setting so I could kind of get in touch with some Japanese young people. They didn't know I was from Oxford from the beginning. I just said, I'm visiting Todai. And then they were already so shocked because Todai is perceived as the top uni in Japan. And I was like, oh my God, how should I reveal my Oxford status? That's even like a jump. So of course, when I was in Todai, then I naturally say I'm from Oxford. I'm visiting fellow here, blah blah blah. But then when in daily life conversation, you don't want to scare people right ahead. Just, I'm from Oxford. That takes some effort and planning to navigate, I would say. Going back to the question on trust building, so I would say pre-interview relational work is quite difficult to do because there isn't a chance for you to do it. But once you did the interview, then I actually use my WeChat and also my Instagram account, my project account, and then I follow the participants. So sometimes I could see the Instagram stories they uploaded. And also they would be posting about the work and portfolio that they building, the creative work they created, and also what they were doing when they had a break. So these are quite interesting chance for me to kind of build a long-term relationship, and these would kind of generate other data because they would help me spread out the word and spread out my project portfolio to other people. So it's like a two-step way of communicating, getting the project's name out, rather than like a one-to-one relationship building with everyone. So in the Chinese group, actually, I was invited later on to give like a brief presentation of the findings of the research to a group of freelance workers. In the Japanese side, there isn't like a very well organized community there, but I've got someone telling me they want to apply for a master's in the UK, and then they came to me to ask my advice. And they were telling me they wanted to visit me in the UK. So yeah, so that's kind of some long-term stuff, some life experiences, benefits and consequences, positive ways.
We still have time?
Yes.
I was at a presentation this morning and it was, thesis, students giving presentations
Yes.
about their thesis. And the big thing that came up was the messiness of like the process, particularly moving from the literature review
Right.
into the, your interview protocols if you're doing questions and whatnot. And I guess going through COVID and moving offline and online, I think that must have been incredibly disruptive. Can you just talk a little bit
Yes,
about
yes.
that? I'm fascinated by that part of the process.
Yes, it was really a roller coaster story. And then and then also my supervisor was away in my second year as well, so it was extra roller coaster. So where do I start? Right, I think did I mention on the slides? So my approach of qualitative research is modified grounded theory. So I had like a rough theoretical inquiry focus when I entered the field, but also allowed themes to organically emerge. But in this case, it's not just a theme, the whole direction, you kind of just got a revamp. So I think it was for grad students, I think, in particular, when we were not very confident, you would want to kind of stick to a comfort zone of researching something more safe. But I think this time the pivoting was quite rewarding, and I don't regret it. So I would say the sample and empirical focus changed a lot because I originally focusing on non-standard workers in certain sectors, and then it's now highly educated professionals and freelance. But the underlying thing was still kind of there. I would say that the precarity focus was kind of still there. So that was the thing that kind of stayed, but of course lots of things change. And practically there are lots of things that you have to handle as well, because when you change the sample, you have to reapply the curing as well. That was quite painful. And then you have to also redo the literature review and alternate between the literature and the theory building, which I actually quite enjoy. It was kind of a creative process of theory building. You just won't know what the paper is about until you write it out, and when you reach that final stage. Yeah, I don't even know what my some of my papers would look like. I've been submitting something to two journals, but sometimes when depending on what the reviewers say, you have to edit very drastically. So I would say it's always, things are always changing. Yeah, but I can definitely share more after this if you're curious about it.
No, thank you. That's terrific. I just found this messiness part most.
Yes.
It's so hidden, but it's like so important to know. So thank you.
Yeah, I think we don't often got taught about the messy part. It's when we have class, it's usually a very straightforward way. Oh, you do like roll out data collection, code the data, find the themes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any last questions, comments? Great. So like I said, just anything online, just.
I don't think so. I think a few of the people who are there we've had an attrition rate and we're not thinking about it, but.
Okay, well, let's just thank the speaker.